So in the last class, we saw how Stephen tried to write a poem on the episode of the last tram when he parted with Emma Clary. And then Stephen's father talks about his admission to the Belvedere. And the next section begins, the night of the Whitsuntide play had come. Here Stephen is represented as a little more, a little older. And
Sir, can you please say the page number?
In my edition it is page 67. In the last class we discussed how Simon Dedalus was talking about the joke that he laughed with the Jesuit father about Stephen's complaining against Father Dolan. So that was where the last section ended, and after that this section begins. So here Stephen and his classmates, they are going to perform in a play at school which is held on the Whitsuntide day, and it is called the Whitsuntide play. Whitsuntide is a day in the Christian calendar in the month of May, and this girl comes to watch Stephen's performance, and you can imagine that, in a little higher sections of the school, like class 8 or 9 or 10, in the higher section, the adolescent boys, how they tease one another about girls. So Stephen's classmates, some of them saw the girl coming with Stephen's father. In the colloquial parlor they call the father as governor, and they teased Stephen about it. So first the description of the girl. When she stood up, a pink-dressed figure, wearing a curly golden wig and an old-fashioned straw sunbonnet with black penciled eyebrows and cheeks delicately rouged and powdered, was discovered. A low murmur of curiosity ran round the chapel at the discovery of this girlish figure. Low murmur because all the boys assembled there, they start murmuring, looking at the girl. One of the prefects, smiling and nodding his head, approached the dark corner, and having bowed to the stout old lady, said pleasantly, "Is this a beautiful young lady or a doll that you have here, Mrs. Talon?" And then we see Heron and another boy, Wallis. These two boys, they are Stephen's classmates, and they tease him. As two boys were standing in the shelter of a doorway smoking, and before he reached them he had recognized Heron by his voice. "Here comes the noble Dedalus," cried a high throaty voice. "Welcome to our trusty friend." So you see the kind of mocking tone that is there in Heron's address, the noble Dedalus. This welcome ended in a soft peal of mirthless laughter as Heron salaamed and then began to poke the ground with his cane. So Heron was carrying a cane in his hand. Little later he will jokingly beat Stephen with the cane, kind of bullying. Now the two of them, they were actually competitors in the class, and they also differ in their tastes, literary taste, as we will find their debate about who was the greatest poet, Tennyson or Byron. They tell Stephen to uh, mock one of the prefects. Go on, Daedalus, he urged. You can take him off ripplingly. They offer him smoke, but Stephen says that he doesn't smoke. And Heron, obviously disappointed, says, no, said Heron, Daedalus is a model youth, he doesn't smoke, and he doesn't go to bazaars, and he doesn't flirt, and he doesn't damn anything or damn all. So Stephen is very different. He doesn't do all the things that other young men do. Stephen shook his head and smiled in his rival's flushed and mobile face, beaked like a bird's. He had often thought it strange that Vincent Heron had a bird's face as well as a bird's name. So we notice here that Stephen is attracted both by the face and by the name. He is attracted by the name because he is attracted by words. And the word heron is the name of a bird. And he is attracted by the face because he is attracted to shapes in an artistic way. So when he looks at Heron's face, he finds it strange that the face looks like that of a bird because of his hooked nose. And so he wonders that the boy has both a bird's name as well as a bird's face. This is another play on the bird imagery in the novel, as you know, though not very significant. But here the bird image does not stand for escape or elevation. Here the bird image stands for a bit some different kind of image, an image of cruelty, because birds can also be birds of prey. And then they begin teasing Stephen about the girl. You are a sly dog, Daedalus. Why so? Said Stephen. You'd think butter wouldn't melt in your mouth, said Heron, but I'm afraid you are a sly dog. Might I ask you what you are talking about? Said Stephen urbanely. Urbane means polite. So Stephen is always polite, unlike the other boys. He is more sophisticated. Indeed you might, answered Heron. We saw her, Wallis, didn't we? And deucedly pretty she is too, and so inquisitive. And what part does Stephen take Mr. Daedalus? And will Stephen not sing Mr. Daedalus? Heron is imitating the voice of the girl. The girl is making these queries to Stephen's father. So they think that Stephen conceals this matter of the girl to them. Not half bad, answered Wallis quietly as he placed his holder once more in a corner of his mouth. So a boy is talking about the beauty of girls, you can imagine. Heron says that she is deucedly pretty, she is very pretty, and Wallis says not half bad, condescendingly, but of course praising nevertheless. Then Stephen thinks about the girl. All day he had thought of nothing but their leave-taking on the steps of the tram at Harold's Cross, the stream of moody emotions it had made to course through him, and the poem he had written about it. So Stephen thinks about the leave-taking at the tram, and then the poem that he wrote. So he was basically preoccupied with the thought of the girl. All day he had imagined a new meeting with her, for he knew that she was to come to the play. The old restless moodiness had again filled his breast, as it had done on the night of the party, but had not found an outlet in verse. The growth and knowledge of 2 years of boyhood stood between then and now, forbidding such an outlet, and all day the stream of gloomy tenderness within him had started forth and returned upon itself in dark courses and eddies, wearing him in the end until the pleasantry of the prefect and the painted little boy had drawn from him a movement of impatience. So, from this narration, we know that Stephen remembers a meeting with the girl 2 years back. So Joyce never gives his reader a very clear, indication of the development of time or the progress of time, but from bits and pieces here and there we have to pick up how much time has lapsed in between. So you may as well admit, Heron went on, that we have fairly found you out this time. You can't play the saint on me anymore. That is one sure file. So the theme of confession is introduced once again as Heron talks about admit. So Heron would bully him and beat him with the cane on his leg and say admit. Now this admission or confession is the Roman Catholic is allied to the Roman Catholic theme of the confession. As you know that the Roman Catholics, they practice confession. They go to a priest and confess about their sins without being identified by the priest from the other end of a latticed window. So for confession there is a Latin verse which is called the Confiteor. Alright, so the boys, they are all aware of this verse, and therefore mockingly Heron kind of tells him to admit. Admit, repeated Heron, striking him again with his cane across the calf of the leg. The stroke was playful, but not so lightly given as the first had been. Stephen felt the skin tingle and glow slightly and almost painlessly, and bowing submissively as if to meet his companion's jesting mood, began to recite the Confiteor. So Stephen also, jokingly or accepting the joke, recites the Confiteor. The episode ended well, for both Heron and Wallis laughed indulgently at the irreverence. So this kind of bullying goes on, and then what is the point of this? Well, first of all, this bullying is associated with pain, and Stephen has already learnt what pain is in his experience with Father Dolan. Now, why does Joyce from time to time mention such painful experiences for Stephen? Because pain is an experience which makes one mature. As a child, when a child is beaten up, then the child learns that there may be pain, that the world is not all smooth, that there are areas of suffering. So pain and suffering matures the mind, and since it is a novel of growth, a novel of growing up, that is why the impact of pain on the psyche is demonstrated, or you may say is expressed. Then there is a reference to Stephen's way of thinking, which is to some extent original. In an essay class, Stephen writes an essay which the teacher, when he corrects it, he finds it to be heretical. Because in a Roman Catholic school, teachers are all aware, or they remain vigilant, that the students do not develop any kind of heresy or heretical belief. So, reading Stephen's essay, the English master Mr. Tate says, this fellow has heresy in his essay. A hush fell on the class. Mr. Tate did not break it, but dug with his hand between his crossed thighs, while his heavily starched linen creaked about his neck and wrists. Stephen did not look up. It was a raw spring morning, and his eyes were still smarting and weak. He was conscious of failure and of detection, of the squalor of his own mind and home, and felt against his neck the raw edge of his turned and jagged collar. So, Stephen kind of expected it, that he would be found out, because he was no great believer of faith of the Christian religion at this point. Then Heron and Nash, they debate with Stephen about who is the greatest poet. First, who is the greatest writer of prose. So Stephen says Newman, referring to Cardinal Newman, who wrote many prose pieces and was a great stylist in writing. On the point of Newman, Stephen and Heron agree. But when there comes the discussion about who is the greatest poet, English poet of the time, then they disagree violently. So Stephen answers, Byron, of course. And Heron laughs a scornful laugh. What are you laughing at? Asked Stephen. You, said Heron, Byron is the greatest poet. He is only a poet for uneducated people. You may keep your mouth shut, said Stephen, turning on him boldly, and all you know about poetry is what you wrote up on the slates in the yard and were going to be sent to the loft for. Boland, another boy who does not have much intelligence, obviously, was laughing, and Stephen says that you do not know anything about poetry, so you shut up. And then Heron begins to bully Stephen once again, and he strikes with the cane once again. Admit that Byron was no good. No. Admit. No. Admit. No, no. So Stephen doesn't want to admit, and Heron wants to force him to admit. So this is the kind of scene we may expect in any kind of interrogation. When a prisoner is interrogated by the police, then they torture him and then they force him to admit something. So here it happens between these two boys, and Stephen refuses to admit. So we see that the paradigm of confession with which this novel started, when Dante tells the little boy Stephen to confess and to apologize, pull out his eyes and so on, the bold rhyme. So from there, this concept of confession and apology, this we may say a leitmotif, that is a motif which is repeated throughout the novel. The leitmotif of confession appears in this novel. Now, why is it important? Of course, because of the Roman Catholic context of the novel, and it is related to the idea of guilt, which is integral to the Roman Catholic concept of sin. So sin and atonement, or guilt and punishment. So these ideas are related, and through the paradigm or through the leitmotif of confession, it comes out. However, Stephen does not feel angry at his friends, because he feels that his friends are too immature. And the fact that he doesn't feel angry indicates that he is more mature than his friends. And this episode of this bullying over who is the greatest poet It also indicates the centrality of literary models in Stephen's life. So for him, for a would-be poet, it is very serious issue. Who is going to be his model as a poet? And as I told you earlier, that Byron was a much more revolutionary kind of poet among the the second generation of romantics. So for Stephen, Byron was the model. So this issue where a friend bullies him, beats him, was this an issue of honor? Should Stephen feel that he has been insulted, he has been dishonored, and therefore should he get angry with his friend? The spirit of quarrelsome comradeship which he had observed lately in his rival had not seduced Stephen from his habits of quiet obedience. He mistrusted the turbulence and doubted the sincerity of such comradeship, which seemed to him a sorry anticipation of manhood. So, this kind of comradeship, this kind of friendship, where there is an aggressive element, Stephen despises it, as a preamble to manhood. Piyash, are you trying to say anything? The question of honor here raised was, like all such questions, trivial to him. While his mind had been pursuing in its intangible phantoms and turning in irresolution from such pursuits, he had heard about him the constant voices of his father and of his masters, urging him to be a gentleman above all things, and urging him to be a good Catholic above all things. These voices had now come to be hollow sounding in his ears. When the gymnasium had been opened, he had heard another voice urging him to be strong and manly and healthy, and when the movement towards national revival had begun to be felt in the college, yet another voice had bidden him to be true to his country and help to raise up her foreign language and tradition in the profane world, as he foresaw. A worldly voice would bid him raise up his father's fallen state by his labors, and meanwhile the voice of his school comrades urged him to be a decent fellow, to shield others from blame, or to beg them off and to do his best to get free days for the school. So here is a list of so many demands that were made upon Stephen when he was growing up. So in his early childhood, he constantly faced the demand from his parents to be a gentleman, to be a good Roman Catholic, and so on. Then as he grew up a little and he came to reside in the hostel, then the voices of his parents became hollow, because those ideals did not seem to be immediate anymore. Then when he was made to exercise in the gymnasium, then he felt the demand upon him to be strong and healthy and so on, to be athletic. When the nationalist movement reached his school, then there was this demand upon him to side with it, to support it. Then there was the demand to raise the Irish language to a higher status, because the Irish were feeling the domination of the English, and in this domination language plays an important part. So therefore many Irish poets like Yeats and Synge and other poets and dramatists, they felt the urge to revive the Irish language and culture and to do something in Irish. But we will see that Stephen did not support that cause either. And then there was a demand from the family upon him to earn a decent income and to raise the financial status of his family, because the family was financially distressed. So all these demands came to him, and Stephen felt them like several voices. The demands of the classmates or the students of the school that he should not complain against anybody to the authorities, and that he should try to find some holidays for them by persuading the authorities and so on. He gave them ear only for a time, but he was happy only when he was far from them, beyond their call, alone, or in the company of phantasmal comrades. So he was never really in the midst of his friends, identifying himself as one of them. And he also did not attach any importance to all these voices or all these demands upon him. He preferred to live in a mental world of his own and live alone. So these are the indications of the character of Stephen that was gradually forming, and Stephen was gradually becoming more and more different from others, from his friends. And that is why he did not feel the issue of honor to be important. He felt it to be trivial, because for an artist it is the inner life which is important, and what happens to him externally he can neglect. Then again the narration moves to the performance and the girl in the audience, and Stephen sees her. He saw her serious, alluring eyes watching him from among the audience, and their image at once swept away his scruples, leaving his will compact. So by looking at the girl, he became determined to perform well because she was in the audience. For one rare moment he seemed to be clothed in the real apparel of boyhood, and as he stood in the wings among the other players, he shared the common mirth amid which the drop scene was hauled upwards by two able-bodied priests with violent jerks and all awry. So at that moment when he was on the stage, just before the performance, then he identified himself with the other boys who were also there waiting to perform. And this was a rare moment because Stephen hardly ever identified himself with the boys. After his performance, he is so agitated, thinking how his performance would be appreciated by the girl, that he left the stage quickly and rid himself of his mummery and passed out through the chapel into the college garden. So he leaves the college and begins to walk without waiting for his father or for anybody in his agitation. When his father calls him, then he says, "I have to leave a message down in George's Street." He said to his father, "Quickly, I will be home after you." So he tells his father to leave, and he says that I will go back later. Without waiting for his father's questions, he ran across the road and began to walk at breakneck speed down the hill. He hardly knew where he was walking. Pride and hope and desire, like crushed herbs in his heart, sent up vapors of maddening incense before the eyes of his mind. He strode down the hill amid the tumult of sudden risen vapors of wounded pride and fallen hope and baffled desire. They streamed upwards before his anguished eyes in dense and maddening fumes and passed away above him till at last the air was clear and cold again. So this passage gives an indication to the inner turmoil in his mind. He walks very fast down the hill, and he felt pride, hope, desire as if they are crushing his heart, and they are sending up vapors like vapors of emotion. And somehow Stephen feels wounded pride and fallen hope and baffled desire. So these emotions may be inexplicable. Why does he feel that his pride is wounded, or his desire is baffled, and so on? But what we understand is that the emotion of love for the girl and the desire to be appreciated by her creates an anxiety in him, and this anxiety finds expression through these wounded pride, fallen hope, and baffled desire, through these expressions. So his anguished eyes in dense and maddening fumes, so as if these emotions are sending up fumes and he is becoming more and more troubled. A film still veiled his eyes, but they burned no longer. A power akin to that which had often made anger or resentment fall from him brought his steps to rest. A power akin to this present feeling, that his eyes did not burn any longer, but there was still a film of veil over it, that is, he was not seeing clearly in his mind's eye, of course. So there was some kind of calm in his mind after this turbulence, and this calm or this serenity of mind at other times helped him to control his anger. As we have often seen that when Stephen becomes angry at his school friends, immediately he controls himself, because he feels that his friends are immature, and therefore he should not be angry with them. Similarly here, there is this emotion of serenity which kind of controls him, and from this highly emotional stage, or this narration about this highly emotional stage, which is the we may say which is in the style of the kind of stream of consciousness, from that Stephen comes back to reality, and whenever he comes back to reality, then Joyce uses the realistic technique. And in this novel, Joyce always refers to the senses, the stimuli, visual, olfactory, and so on. So it is this ugly scene of the street, Dublin street, which makes Stephen come back to this reality. This is expressed here. He saw the word lots on the wall of the lane and breathed slowly the rank and heavy air. Now, what is the significance of the word lots? It could be the name of a prostitute which somebody had carved on the wall. And then he breathes the air which is rank and heavy, that is foul. And Stephen identifies the smell, that is horse piss and rotted straw, he thought. It is a good odor to breathe. It will calm my heart. My heart is quite calm now. I will go back. Then there is a break and there is another section. In this section, Stephen goes to Cork with his father, and he knows that his father is going to sell his property. And as Simon goes to Cork, he meets a friend there, and with his friend and Stephen, Simon remembers his youth, how he was happy, or you may say happy-go-lucky in his youth, and right now Simon feels the burden, the financial burden of the family, and he can't cope with it. So this financial breakdown leads to his emotional breakdown as well. And Stephen sees his father emotionally collapsing, and that is an experience which makes him more mature, because it is the collapse of the father figure. In Lacanian terms, according to Jacques Lacan, the French psychoanalyst, in a child's psyche, the name of the father stands for law or authority. The name of the father stands for authority or law, and every child in his adolescence would try to break this law. So if you remember the Freudian Oedipus complex, a boy child, looks at his father as a sexual rival, because the child also desires his mother. And what happens in the Oedipus myth? Oedipus kills his father and marries his mother. So every boy child would metaphorically, when he would grow up, kill his father. In other words, would disobey the authority of his father. Therefore, the sign of the father breaking down emotionally is also the sign of the father figure or the authority figure collapsing. So this section is full of nostalgia, because Simon Dedalus nostalgically remembers his youth. He knew, however, that his father's property was going to be sold by auction, and in the manner of his own disposition he felt the world give the lie rudely to his fantasy. So he is going to be dispossessed because his father's property is going to be sold, and that is a rude jolt to his fantasy world, because that is the real world. With his father, Stephen goes to a classroom, and in the classroom he sees on a desk some student has, it was an anatomy classroom, some student has carved the word fetus. So Stephen identified his father to be just an ordinary boy, just an ordinary youth, because that is what ordinary boys do. They carve letters on desks. But Stephen would never do that, because he was much more matured than them. He would write poetry, but he would not carve letters, particularly obscene words, on the desk. So Stephen's father was falling in his eyes as a hero. Simon, of course, gives him some fatherly advice. When you kick out for yourself, Stephen, as I dare say you will one of these days, remember, whatever you do, to mix with gentlemen, and so on and so forth. So how in his youth Simon was considered as a gentleman, and Stephen should also behave like that. Then Simon ruminates, remembers the days of his youth. Then he breaks down while telling the story. Stephen heard his father's voice break into a laugh which was almost a sob. He was the handsomest man in Cork at that time, by God he was. The women used to stand to look after him in the street. That is, Stephen's father's friend says about Simon. He heard the sob passing loudly down his father's throat and opened his eyes, breaking suddenly on his side, turned the sky and clouds into a fantastic world of sombre masses with lake-like spaces of dark, rosy light. His very brain was sick and powerless. He could scarcely interpret the letters of the signboards of the shops. By his monstrous way of life, he seemed to have put himself beyond the limits of reality. Nothing moved him or spoke to him from the real world unless he heard in it an echo of the infuriated cries within him. He could respond to no earthly human appeal, dumb and insensible to the call of summer and gladness and companionship, wearied and dejected by his father's voice. He could scarcely recognize as his own thoughts and repeated slowly to himself, I am Stephen Dedalus. I am walking beside my father, whose name is Simon Dedalus. We are in Cork, in Ireland. Cork is a city. Our room in the Victoria Hotel. Victoria and Stephen and Simon. Simon and Stephen and Victoria. Names. This paragraph gives us the impression of the first person narrative, because it takes us into Stephen's psyche, exactly how Stephen felt, what he thought, but it is in the third person narrative. And only the last sentence is a speech when Stephen says, I am Stephen Dedalus, and so on. But the preceding paragraph, as I told you, is in the manner Gustave Flaubert, the French writer, would write. It is a third person narrative which gives the impression of the first person. So in Stephen's speech, since he feels that he is kind of wasting his life, he is leading a monstrous life, he is very unsocial, he is not like others, he does not make many friends, and so on. So Stephen feels that he has rejected companionship, friendship, whereas his father would always have friends, and even now he has a friend with him. So Stephen feels that he is a monster, he is different from others, and this mental world in which he lives, he tries to come back to the real world by uttering the names, the name of the city, the name, his own name, the name of the father, and so on. But uttering these names, then finally he says names, which means that these are only words. So for Stephen as a poet or as a writer, it is the words which matter. Or he lives in a world of words. He lives in a verbal world. And the words are important to him. And now he feels distant from the memory of his childhood. The memory of his childhood suddenly grew dim. He tried to call forth some of its vivid moments, but could not. So his childhood, say at Clongoes Wood College, his childhood when he lived with all his brothers and sisters, with his parents at home, he could not remember his childhood very well, which indicates development in his psyche, maturity. He grows up, he becomes older. Then his father and his friends, among whom there is one little old man, they drink together. Stephen watched the 3 glasses being raised from the counter as his father and his 2 cronies drank to the memory of their past. An abyss of fortune or of temperament sundered him from them. His mind seemed older than theirs. So Stephen feels that he is different from them as well as he is older from them, as if they are immature. Simon Dedalus behaves, of course, in a very immature fashion, and his friends, they are also behaving like that. Now that happens when older men, when they meet with their childhood friends, friends of their youth, then they behave like children, or they behave like the youth, the age that they were remembering. But Stephen never behaved like a child or even a young person, even when he is young or he is a child. He always behaved in a different manner, in a more mature fashion. So he looks at these 3 old men and feels that he is older than them. His mind seemed older than theirs. It shone coldly on their stripes and happiness and regrets like a moon upon a younger earth. The moon is much older than the earth. So as if like the moon looking upon the earth, his mind looks upon these men as much younger. No life or youth stirred in him as it had stirred in them. He had known neither the pleasure of companionship with others, nor the vigor of rude male health, nor filial piety. Filial piety, that is devotion to his father as a son. Nothing stirred within his soul but a cold and cruel and loveless lust. His childhood was dead or lost, and with it his soul capable of simple joys. And he was drifting amid life like the barren shell of the moon. And then there are a few lines of quotation from Shelley. Art thou pale for weariness of climbing heaven and gazing on the earth, wandering companionless? He repeated to himself the lines of Shelley's fragment. Its alternation of sad human ineffectualness with vast inhuman cycles of activity chilled him, and he forgot his own human and ineffectual grieving. So this image of the moon drifting in the sky as if it is weary, that we find in Shelley's lines, art thou pale for weariness of climbing heaven and gazing on the earth, wandering companionless. So that fits Stephen's mood, because he thinks that he himself is weary and companionless. Okay. So the purpose of this section is to indicate the growth in Stephen's psyche, and he gets a rude jolt when the financial problem of the family kind of crashes on him, and he sees his father breaking down emotionally because of his failure to look after his family, and he has to sell his property. Then as if Stephen grows up very quickly, but at the same time he feels that he is not involved so much with the family problems, and he lives in a mental world of his own. We will stop here.